All
Oh
right.
God.
All right.
We'll
Well, you
dwindle that
guys
down
know
here.
how we start each time we get to meet together. So we are all about recognizing good things that happen in the business because in the nature of what we do, it's really easy just to focus on what needs to be fixed. So instead, tell us what's been going on in your worlds that's been good. Any wins, personal, professional, what good things have been happening?
Sorry, getting the kids ready my son's ready for school. But I would say for us, we've been talking about starting this hotel. It's going to take past the new year. And there's talking about having us start on Monday. And this is a big hotel on the Las Vegas Strip. It's called Blue Fountain. We're supposed to be starting that on Monday, and we're gonna be hiring big time as well to complete this project. So I think that's great news.
Yes.
Oh yeah. Thought the win was kids are ready to go. I was like, that's a win right there.
That's coming from a guy with 3 kids. He gets it. Anybody else have a win that they want to share, personal or business? We like to celebrate them all.
I see that you guys started on my Google page. Y'all cleaned it up a little bit, and it looks a lot better than the way I had it. So that's a win for me because I'm no writer, and what y'all did was awesome. So appreciate that. And I just started.
Oh
with you.
yeah.
So I see that you guys are on it. Appreciate it.
Hey, we love to hear that, Fred. And what I kind of hear in that is like, I'm just happy I don't have to do that stuff anymore.
That's it.
Is kind of what I just heard.
That's it.
And I see some head nods where people are like,
Yeah.
Yep, that's a relief.
Yeah, that was awesome. I got up this morning. There's a couple things I want to talk to Bryce about, but for 99% of it was awesome.
Love that. Love that, Fred. Well, so much more to come. Anybody else have a win that they want to share?
Sure, I'll share a win. I did a job when we ran gas lines and stuff, and then it was a leak, and so I was like stressed out, thinking it was all my stuff, and then coming to find out, there was a gas line next to mine. There was an old gas line that was their stuff feeding another building, so it was their fault. It's not my fault, you know what I mean? And then I bid it, and it's possibly gonna turn into a $40,000 job to replace all the gas lines. So I already bid it. They're pretty much gas is off, so they're like, we gotta get this thing done. They're tripping out, So just it turns around. Like something looks bad and you think is bad and it's not so bad. Sometimes it's not your fault, So that's
yes.
So
Bobby, you got to come in and be the hero, in that
Save
situation.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
You were the Mario in that situation.
Yeah, right.
Anybody else before we get going here? Okay, well, Bryce, I know you've got some good content here to share with us here today, so I'm going to let you go ahead and get her started.
Can do. All right, is everybody seeing my screen? It popped up?
Yes, sir.
Sweet. All righty, y'all. So you saw it in the emails leading up to it. Today's going to be a talk more specifically going into some of the tools and systems that we have. But we've been kind of on this streak recently in our group calls, talking about how to win with sales, advertising, and I want to go into the part that comes right alongside with that, which is the money matters. How do we make sure that we're consistently making money in the business? A lot of times there may be these silent things that are working under the radar that can make it really hard to make money, even in business where you're making sales and you're getting plenty of customers. Once we have these other areas figured out. So that is our focus today. This is going to be a talk that's really applicable to everybody, for general contractors and remodelers. Going to be very easily applicable for plumbers, service side of the business. Also very easily applicable, electricians as well. You just take the same concepts we're talking about here and apply them to your small jobs. It's really about verifying how you're making money in the business. So I mentioned it. We talked about this before in our financial super moves calls about fixing money issues There's a lot of ways to go about this, but one of the primary things you have to do is set proper expectations with your customers to avoid these money problems before they ever become a problem, right? Things like having a collections process, not saying, we'll figure it out when we get there with that. Having a draw schedule whenever payment is going to be taken. Things that are more about protecting yourself from other people. But today, what I want to look at more is things that kill cash flow that are more internally focused, the stuff that's under the radar, like I mentioned earlier, some poverty promoters, cash flow killers, poverty promoters, same idea. So anybody want to unmute for me real quick and just talk about some of the things that you think maybe, stuff that goes under the radar that may be reasons we're losing money when we think we should be making money.
Not paying attention to like this, I guess our labor, letting that kind of get ahead of you. I'm not sure if that makes sense of what I'm trying to say.
Absolutely. Yeah. Expenses outpacing for sure. What else?
Materials waste. Watching
Definitely.
your hands waste material carelessly, throwing things away that can be used down the line or in the job.
Yep.
Good stuff.
For sure.
Matt, I gotta just, can you hear me? Oh yeah, you
Yeah.
can. Matt, I gotta say I love your deep voice. That was like a radio voice right there. I thought I actually turned the radio on for a second. I was like,
Or something else.
We had this conversation a long time ago. You guys fancied it a little too much.
we'll continue in the breakout room.
We
So
miss you,
I'll stop.
Jonathan. We miss you.
Miss you too.
I have one.
Bryce,
Dale-
Maybe.
Yeah.
Dale
Sorry,
Inks
I'll-
just put feast or famine in the business. How I see that is cash flow issues, or maybe you're in a business that's a little bit more seasonal. When it rains, it pours, and then it can dry all up. A lot of HVAC guys are approaching winter. That can be a big cause.
Yeah, I was gonna say, just making sure you assign, people tasks that they're capable of doing, knowing that they have the skills required to do what you're asking them to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's great. Yeah, making sure you plan out your team, kind of play the schedule Tetris a little bit. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, these are all really good, and you guys are aware of some of these things that are under the radar. I'm not even going to talk about all the stuff that we mentioned here, but there are a few that kind of fall under this category that you mentioned: materials waste. Making sure that your hands aren't throwing away stuff that is valuable, assigning the right people. To me, that comes under this umbrella just a little bit of potentially inaccurate estimating. Not to say that you're just riddled with mistakes, but that there may be opportunities for us to put in a factor of safety, or knowing this, we estimate this way, just to kind of protect yourself in that way. Two things I'm going to go into specifically with that is margin versus markup. If you guys have been to any sort of contracting classes, a lot of you probably had to do this for your licensing. We'll talk about this concept a little bit, and then also give you a tool that helps you verify, hey, am I getting what I should be getting? And then also inaccurate estimating because we haven't verified it. This is where we come across things like materials waste or labor underestimation or overestimation. We'll talk about comparing estimates from when you bid it to when it actually happened in reality. And then this is what Shaytoya mentioned: expenses outpaying customer payments. I'm not going to go too deep into this, just going to talk, touch on it. And then the third thing I have here is trusting people. No, I'm just kidding. That's not a way that we promote poverty. It's good to trust people, but we don't want to be a bank. What I mean by that, and we won't go into this in detail really at all, but it's too important not to include. Don't be a bank. You guys are small business owners. A bank is its own small business. If you're going to give out loans to people, and that means doing work without being paid for it, you're acting as a bank. You might as well charge interest. So consider things like financing, offering financing, setting up those draw schedules, collections, that sort of stuff. We're not going to go too deep into that, but these are the things that I really want to focus on, these first two: inaccurate estimating, and then the potential of expenses outpacing your customer payments. All right. All right. So what I want to get into here is just a couple of thoughts. If you're feeling yes, or feeling that these questions really dig at the heart of what you're feeling a lot of times when it comes to cash flow in your business, something just doesn't quite add up. Money in the bank isn't what we expected. We're not profitable. Can't figure out why. We're closing jobs. We're making deals happen. We're getting stuff done. The jobs just keep going over time, over budget. This is where we need to go, is we have to review our estimates. Don't let yourself get stuck in feelings. Let's verify what's really going on. Because again, odds are maybe estimating is off in some way, or production is off, which we can account for with looking at and refining our estimating. So bear with me for a minute here. Going to get a little scholastic before we get into the actual tool that I want to show you guys that we have to help you verify and validate your estimating. Just want to explain this concept. And what I want you guys to do as I'm going through these numbers, I'm going to go through some numbers here. Get out your phone and use your calculator to verify this is what's actually happening. Because a lot of you are probably doing something like this and not even realizing what it's doing to your cash flow. So the idea here is margin versus markup. Somebody throw out here, how do you, or what profit percentage are you trying to get on your bids?
40%, 50%.
40, 50%. Cool. Anybody else?
I'm right in there. I'm about the same, 40, 50.
Okay.
For small service work. Okay.
Cool. So a lot of times what people will do, and this is to no fault of their own, it's what makes sense. We want a 30% margin. So we're going to say, here's my cost, and I'm going to multiply 30% to add that on to my cost. And that's what I'm going to charge the customer. Well, I want to show you kind of what happens when we do that. So looking at 30% here, say you have a job that costs $10,000, right? That's labor, that's materials, everything. Just making easy numbers here. A lot of people would say, okay, I want 30% margin on that, so I'm going to charge that job at $13,000, right? My profit, my overhead is going to be $3,000. If we work the numbers backwards, because at the end of the day, right, you're going to receive $13,000 from the customer. That's the total payment of the job. You're going to spend $10,000 and you have $3,000 left over, right? So $3,000 is your profit margin and your overhead. If you divide your profit, $3,000, by your $13,000 total price, you're actually only getting at best 23% as your margin. If you're to look at your monthly net profits, say how much money you collected and how much money you have left over, you thought you were getting 30%, but before you even account and do overhead expenses, you're already at 23% for both profit and overhead. This is what happens whenever we just multiply the percentage that we want. Instead of doing a markup, what we need to do is divide by your desired cost percentage. And that sounds funky, but if you want 30%, divide by 70%. If you want 20%, divide by 80%. If you want 40%, divide by 60%. Because what this does is it makes sure that your final number, what you actually charge the customer, when you collect all the money and you spend all the money, what you have left over is 30% of what you charge the customer, the way that you're expecting it to be. So same numbers here. And sorry if I'm getting too deep into the weeds, but again, do it on your calculator to verify all the stuff that I'm saying and see if this maybe relates to what you're doing. Total cost of the job, $10,000. If we divide by 0.7, 70%, that's going to give us a number that is 14,286. meaning our profit margin is 4,286. Right? Just like we did before, when we multiplied the costs, divide the 3,000 by the 13,000. We're going to divide the 4,286 by 14,286. And then you actually have the number that's 30%, what you expected. Everybody still tracking with me? Is this still making sense so far?
Yeah, I mean, this is great. One thing I'll throw out there is, the first one, just to clarify, is, and correct me if I'm wrong, Bryce, is a common way for someone to assume they're getting that 30% cushion in there, but they're really not. They're losing out on that 7% every time they do that in this example. It's not a way of doing it, it's just a wrong way of doing it, flat out. This should not be the formula you use to take the total cost and multiply it by the percentage that you want. And that's intuitively sounds amazing and sounds great on the surface, but then you're really missing out on a good chunk of profit there.
Absolutely right. Yeah, and it's not that you're just missing out on that good chunk of profit. You're expecting to get 30% because you did the math that tells you should be getting 30%. But it's never possible. Your bank account will never reflect this 30% number if you're just multiplying 30% to create your profit and overhead margin. And that's not even accounting for paying overhead expenses, the indirect costs. So yeah, that's 100% right, Jonathan. So I want to let this sit for just a second, and again, verify the stuff on your phone, because a lot of people I've run into that are doing just the tack on 30% at the end, and that's how I get my profit number. You're never going to get 30% in your bank account. Okay. Everybody good with that? Good enough to move on?
Yeah. So how would you calculate that if you wanted 50%? How would you do it?
You would divide by 0.5.
That's 20 grand, right? I just did it.
Yeah, it would be. Because then $10,000 over $20,000 means 50% of what you have left over is what you charge the customer.
Right.
So if you want a 50% margin, you're doubling the price, the cost to the customer.
But isn't that the right way to calculate it? If you're looking for, you're looking to have 20% profit and 30% for overhead, you're just putting 10% in there for overhead, right?
Say those numbers again.
We typically want to have 20% net profit, and then we budget 20 to 30% for overhead and salaries, corporate salaries. Yeah. So that's just another way of doing it, right?
Yeah. So if you want to have 20% for profit, and I'll show this in the tool and maybe will make more sense. But yeah, for 20% profit and 20% for overhead, that means you need 40% above your cost of goods sold. So you're going to divide by 0.6 or 60% in order to have that 40% margin at the end. That's right.
And I think where some of the confusion might be, Rob, and I think it sounds like you've got it nailed down, but just for the clarity of the group, sometimes people don't know what to put into overhead. We do have a call that kind of touches overhead. I think, Bryce, you might be touching on it here in a moment. But your overhead costs, like when it comes to labor, your technicians, your subcontractors, that's more of a cost of goods sold expense. Labor expenses that would go into overhead, more so, like Rob, you mentioned that you have some people who are on like salary, maybe your office person, that would be more of an overhead expense.
Yeah. That's all. Yeah, that's what we try to do. I just wanted to I did the numbers real quick. Yeah, we try to take, if it's a $10,000 job, we're trying to, we usually get 48, 45% margin, but we're trying to get 50, just to make sure there's money to cover everything.
Rob, I'm just glad you could verify we're still honest, so I appreciate that.
No, good. I just wanted to make sure I was doing it right in my head.
That's right. Yeah. No, very good.
Absolutely love it. That's good.
And since we're on the topic already, this is something I wanted to cover, 2 brief things before getting into the tool itself that helps do all of this for you. I just want to explain the why behind and the concept that you need to know, but then we've got the tool that does the stuff for you. But does anybody have a really good, succinct definition of overhead here? Anybody?
I'll take a crack at it. I mean, I put everything but the kitchen sink in there. I'm joking, but I put it. We got to put in insurance, taxes, salaries. I mean, that's what I consider it. I mean, I put try to put everything I can in there, but it's really thinking about licensing, all the expenses that you have annualized that you try to just capture. I mean, that's kind of what I try to do when I look at overhead. One man's opinion.
Yep. No, that's great. Yeah. Overhead, essentially, it's your fixed costs that you pay monthly, whether you have any work or not. So this would be like Rob said, salaries, if you have an office space, rent, vehicle and business insurance, utilities. Yeah. Things that are not necessarily overhead that you do want to account for, which the tool will help us do, would be stuff like gas to and from jobs, because you're only spending gas if you're going to and from, or pulling permits. That's a cost that you're only going to have if you go and actually do a job. Now that's something that you can calculate, and it sounds like Rob and his team have done a pretty good job of calculating, roughly what their overhead is based on how many jobs they have monthly. If you want to really get down to the nitty gritty, schedule a time with your coach to do that, or trust us in knowing that we find most businesses have overhead about 10 to 15% of their monthly revenue is usually around that range. Oftentimes a little bit higher, but we can budget for that and be pretty safe. So that's one thing. The second thing I want to mention here before jumping into the estimate tool is budgeting for true labor costs. This can get a little bit confusing for some people, so I'm not going to go too deep into it. But the main thing I want us to know out of this is that what we pay our technicians is not the same as what they cost. And you guys probably already know this, and I'm preaching to the choir, but there's additional costs like an insurance benefit. If you offer insurances, you're paying for that. And then other costs, workers' comp and payroll taxes are the main ones. These should be accounted for. And we do have a tool within the estimate tool I'm about to show us here that will help you figure this out on an hourly rate. This is separate from your overhead, which we calculate at the end. So just broad strokes there. Good with that? All right. So this is the main thing I want to show you guys here is the estimate tool. Close out of that. Okay. Sorry, guys. There we go.
That looked like a
Estimate
pretty
tool.
neat tool. How can I get one of those?
This
All
one?
right. Never mind. We're all good. We'll move on.
Yeah, Jonathan, you can post in the chat. If you don't already have this from your coach, we can put this in the chat for you guys. It's in the breakout rooms. We'll also try to get you some access to it. But this is a simple tool, and it's meant to be simple. It is for us to validate or verify that your pricing is doing this margin versus markup thing that we talked about, that you're accounting for your true labor rate and you have coverage for your overhead costs. There's 2 ways we can estimate, but I'm just talking about the cost plus estimate method here, which is essentially what it sounds like. You take all your costs and you add your fees or your margins that you need to cover the operation of your business and have that profit margin. How this tool works is really straightforward. You keep a list of your materials, whatever it is, drywall, whatever, and you got it from Lowe's, and you spent, I don't know, $18.50 on it. I don't know. We can put random numbers in here, and we can get this to spit us out some information. I know that that's a disproportionate amount of paint cost for drywall paint, but we're just doing an example here.
Dude, have you
So-
ever painted a room or anything? Like that's way off.
Thank you, Jonathan. So you put in your costs for materials. You'd put in costs for any equipment or subcontractors if you've subbed out the job. You'd put that in here. You just put what you're having to pay. These are your costs. You're not adding anything on top of it. No margin, markup, stuff like that. And then you'd also put in your true labor rate, which we have this calculator here that'll help you do it if you need. Again, schedule a call with your coach to get more into the details of the overhead type stuff. But we've got our true labor rates here and how many hours we budgeted for the project, and that calculates in the spreadsheet. So all that you do on this tool is in column E, you change your costs and you can give notation of what the stuff is in the other cells on the spreadsheet. And then for the labor, just change the amount of hours that you have. So this guy's on the job for 46 hours. And then you'll have your subtotal right here for your equipment and subcontractors, as well as your material. And that all gets totaled right there. Now, what we do on our tool is miscellaneous items, stuff like gas that you don't account for, maybe pulling permits, the creation of the estimate itself. We do want to account a little bit of money for that time. So here, we do that just 5% tack on thing that we talked about being bad earlier for your profit margin. Here, we just tack on a little 5% to cover those miscellaneous costs. And then you have your subtotal here for your cost of goods sold. This is what it's going to cost you to do this work. In this line right here, overhead plus profit, we're accounting for that 10 to 15%-ish for overhead and for your profit, your desired profit percentage. So the way we work this spreadsheet is we change this number. If it's, you're only having 10% overhead and you want 20% profit, then you do 30% there. And the rest of the spreadsheet will total up the numbers. If you want 20% profit, 20% overhead, 40%. Typically, yeah, and that's what we'll say. So just change that cell right there. And then it gives you the grand total. All that stuff we talked about in the slide when I had you pull out your phone and calculator stuff, that's all done for you in this spreadsheet. This is a tool that you can use to make your estimate or just to validate your estimates that are currently going out, making sure that, should I be priced around this range or am I way underbidding myself?
Just to attest for that for a second, there's someone I was working with last year, and that was a massive light bulb moment. And it was over $1 million a year business. Not, it's a decent size to make this kind of mistake. Very costly, and they realized, oh my, we've been doing it wrong this whole time, and that's been really hurting us. And so yeah, just if they would have just taken at least one quick verification, hey, it looks like on this bid I have a 40% gross profit. Let's quickly verify that. Let's put the numbers in here and make sure this makes sense. That can really just save you a lot of trouble, just and peace of mind as well.
100%. So this is the main tool, and this is one way that you can then check your numbers. There's another way I want to show you that's a second tool that I'm covering today that is also to check and validate what you're getting versus what you expected. So work with your coach. If you want to get this tool, ask them for it, ask us for it, and we'll share that with you for sure. But let me jump back into my my slides here. Okay. So the second overall thing that I want to cover with you guys, and then there's just one more, and we'll get into breakout rooms, is estimate comparisons. We talked about comparing your estimate versus your expectation above, but here I'm talking about comparing your estimate from reality versus what you bid. I like this quote from Ronald Reagan just because I get to say a little bit of Russian. He says, "Dobre no provre." And I probably said that wrong. If there's anybody Russian here or speaks Russian, please forgive me. But dobre no provre, trust but verify. So I don't want you to come away from this talk that we have today saying, "Oh my gosh, I've been doing it wrong all along. I've been running myself into the ground. I'm slowly sinking myself and my family into poverty. That's not the case. That's not the goal. That's not what we're trying to go for here. Trust yourself. Odds are you're doing okay. You're still running a business. You're working with us, and the stuff we identify is all opportunity, right? Any issues we run across, they're precious. They're helpful, not painful. So how we do this, we want to track our estimates. You could do this during and after the project, but mostly it's helpful after the project is all said and done, all the money's collected. And this is something that we want to do monthly with a couple of jobs. Just spot check. You don't have to do every single one this way. Don't go overboard with it. There's a guy that I'm working with who knows this concept really well, but has gotten overloaded by thinking that we need to do it on every single job. It's okay. You don't have to do it on every job. Just do it on a few. Spot check and give yourself that peace of mind. But here's the tool that we have for estimate comparisons. Again, don't see this spreadsheet if you don't like spreadsheets and say, wow, that's so complicated. This is meant to be simple. We don't want to overcomplicate it. But each row is its own project. All right. And however you come up with your estimates, if you use the estimate tool we covered a second ago, or if you do it through a software or something else, separate your estimate out into these categories. How many labor hours did you bid? How much did you bid for labor expenses? How much did you bid for subcontractors? How much did you bid for materials? There's the estimate total, and this is what you expected in terms of gross profit. Right? That's the estimate side. Then we compare that to reality. What actually happened when we did the job and got paid for it? So we'd put in the number of labor hours, how much we spent on labor and paid our guys, subcontractors, materials, and then how much did we collect from the customer? What was our gross profit at the end? That's all the inputs you have to do on this spreadsheet. Just putting in those numbers kind of separated out on your estimates. This is the important part. Even if there's no calculator involved, you can tell the difference here, right? Who sees the main issue on this project? The one in red, 34 Montana. Anybody see what's wrong?
Labor hours, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, their labor hours are almost 50% under budgeted. They didn't properly account for how much time their team needed. So they weren't going to win on this project because their team worked too slow. Now, that could be a number of issues, but this gives us the opportunity to ask those questions and to dig deeper. It could be that their team ran into unforeseen issues, or it could be that we could have estimated it better, knowing that our team is slower than our best guy. A lot of contractors I work with will bid their estimate thinking of themselves doing it or their best guy doing it. Who's my fastest on this project? And we want to bid not to the best ability. We want to cover our bases. And if we have to put this crew on the job, this is how fast that crew is going to go. That way you're always covered. But yeah, we don't have to have the calculations. We can see it right there. So huge value in doing this. Again, you don't have to do this all the time, even if you just do it monthly. This is a really, really valuable tool. Now, some of you may be looking at this and saying, dude, I think this is a great idea, but I can't tell you how many hours my team was on the job after it happened. I can't tell you how much I spent on labor expenses or material expenses. Well, okay, let's talk about that. So this is the last piece that I want to get into in our talk today, and we'll go to the breakout rooms. I know I'm covering maybe a good amount of stuff a little bit quick, but everybody's still good with it. Hopefully we haven't lost people.
I'm still good with it.
Okay. Awesome. Okay, so here's the second big piece. This is what Shaytoya mentioned at the beginning of the call. Potentially, how we're losing money in business consistently after we've made the sale is our expenses outpace our customer payments. So we want to track this before it becomes an issue. Overall concepts I want to know. This is what separates wealthy business owners from struggling business owners. It's an obsession an obsession with managing their expenses, and starting every job with the goal of finishing better than we expected, better than we planned. So we're looking a little bit inwardly here. We're trying to be proactive rather than reactive. But we want to stay ahead of this money issue. The rule: don't spend money you have not received. We are not banks. We don't have anybody on board with Rep and Growth that is a bank. But a lot of our people do act like banks. Don't spend money you haven't received. Set up a draw schedule by setting the expectation with the customer first. And then track your expenses. Now, I don't say this to add a bunch of tasks to your plate. This absolutely can be a delegated task. If you have a lead on the project, a lead plumber, a lead technician, a lead carpenter, a project manager, this is a normal responsibility for them to own. And all you have to do as the owner is create a time weekly to review this. Or if it's just you as the owner, give yourself a time weekly to do this, to track your expenses, especially if it's a bigger job. And this is also something that can turn into a selling point if it's a regular part of your business operation, which is, hey, we actively track our expenses. We make sure that our pricing is accurate. And that is something that builds trust with potential customers. But this is the third and final tool. It's very brief, guys. I know I'm covering a lot here, but you'll be able to watch this video back and get some more detail. Take it one thing at a time. Find what's most important for you to implement today and just run with that one. But expense tracking. 3 things, very simple. How much money did you receive from the customer? We'll put that in here. How many hours did you log and how much did you pay in labor? Keep track of that here. And then this tells us as well, after we track our expenses, how much did we spend on materials, on gas or whatever. And it tells us roughly our gross profit. Just gives you an idea as the job goes on. You can fill this in every day. You can fill it in every week. You can fill it in every hour if you wanted to. But this is just a way to track. It's a way to do it. Sometimes people will have systems that do this, softwares, but if you don't have anything, this is a great place to start. That way you're not running behind on a project and find out after the fact when your bank account is empty, oh shoot, we've spent more from this customer than we've received from this customer. And we need to ask for another draw, or we need to change our draw schedule process to accommodate for that. All right. This is my last thing, and then we'll jump into the breakout rooms here. Thanks for sticking with me. I know there's a lot, and hopefully we'll have some time to deconstruct this a little bit, debrief in the breakout rooms. But this is a familiar sight for all of us. This is a supply house, right? This is a business, a company. This company is not a bank, and neither are you. So if you have to offer financing or do a collections process, set expectations with a draw schedule up front. Don't be a bank. Be a small business. You could be losing money in some of these ways without ever realizing it. Like we talked about with the margin versus the markup. I think that's maybe one of the key points from this talk is you're expecting 30%, but you literally could never have achieved that 30% if you've just been multiplying by 0.3. So take the time you need to today or this week to use these tools that I showed here to verify that you could actually make the money you're expecting to, and not operating with your hands tied behind your back, without realizing it. So that's my spiel. Let's have Mr. Jonathan Rude put us in those breakout rooms.
And if anybody is needing any of these spreadsheets, I still should